I am Sandeep Karai, the creator of tomelbourne.com.au, a website for everything Melbourne. Welcome to the third episode of the Untold Stories of Melbourne. Once again, this is an Australian story about the funny Prime Ministers of Australia. Australia is a weird country with weird looking animals found nowhere else in the world. Australians are well travelled and very knowledgeable and can talk about anything under the sun, whether it is global economy, climate change, sports or home renovations, you name it. But there is one question 70% of Australians won't be able to answer. The question is, who was the first Prime Minister of Australia? Australians and their leaders are also incredibly unique compared to their counterparts around the world. If you happen to meet the Australian Prime Minister jogging or cycling along the road, no need to address him as Sir or Mr. Prime Minister. You can just call him by his first name. You can even tell him, "Hi mate, hope you're having a good time at the lodge." By the way, lodge is the official residence of the Australian Prime Minister. Now let us begin the untold stories of the funny Prime Ministers of Australia. Okay, now let us begin with the current Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. Everywhere else in the world, people line up the streets just to wave to the Prime Minister. In Australia, the situation is a bit different. The Prime Minister goes to the people, tries to shake their hands, they refuse, and finally he ends up forcefully shaking their hands.
How are you? I'm only shaking your hand if you give more funding to our RFS. So many people here have lost their homes.
We need some vet.
We need more help.
You'd be tired.
Oh, I don't really want to check.
Oh, well, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you tonight.
Okay, you want to... for a cuppa?
How much money for our forgotten New South Wales, Mr Prime Minister? How come we only had 4 trucks to defend our town? Because our town doesn't have a lot of money, but we have hearts of gold, Mr Prime Minister.
Nah, you're an idiot, mate.
Oh.
You really
You
are.
can-
You're getting any votes down here, buddy. You're an idiot. Who votes Liberal around here? Nobody. No Liberal votes. You're out, son. You are out. Good night, see you, mate. Bye. Go on.
What about the people who are dead now, Mr Prime Minister? What about the people who have nowhere to live?
You're not welcome, you
Every single time this area has a flood or a fire, we get nothing. If we were Sydney, if we were North Coast, we would be flooded with donations, with emergency.
And Australia will be the only country in the world where you will see a house owner asking the Prime Minister to move off his lawn. Watch this clip.
Back from there. 1,000 Australians.
Everyone get off the grass, please.
Sure, let's just move back from there.
Hey guys, I've just reseated that.
Please, off the thing.
Sorry, mate.
All good? That's all good. Thanks. So it's the projects that count. Make sure you get off that bloke's lawn.
And next is Tony Abbott, the 28th Prime Minister of Australia. Former Prime Minister Tony Abbott is widely known as the man who redefined the 70mm smile. It will be difficult to find him without his signature smile. A Rhodes Scholar, a fitness maniac, and a very likable person. Most may contradict this, but I would like to stick to it. At age 52, he completed the Ironman competition, which included 3.8 kilometers swimming, 180 kilometer bike ride, and 42 kilometer running. He did it in 14 hours as a test of his mental and physical endurance. When he was Prime Minister, he used to cycle through the streets of Canberra every day morning. Today, you will find him working as a volunteer firefighter. Next is the first female Prime Minister of Australia, Miss Julia Gillard. Anywhere else in the world, if demonstrators surround the Prime Minister and get abusive, the riot police takes charge, and the demonstrators will be sprayed with water, tear gas, capsicum spray, or can even be tasered or shot. Do you know what we do in Australia? We lift our Prime Minister and run. In 2012, when Julia Gillard faced such a situation, her security officers lifted the Prime Minister and just ran. In the process, she lost her slippers, which was later auctioned in eBay.
It's all right. You put this spear away.
Then comes Kevin Rudd, the 26th Prime Minister of Australia, also known as the Cry-Baby Prime Minister. The baby-faced Kevin Rudd cried publicly during his farewell speech to the nation when he was disposed by the Labour Party as Prime Minister. But this only enhanced people's love for him as he was showing his softer side. Kevin Rudd had convict ancestry on both sides of his family. He once told a European audience that made him an absolute pedigree.
As Therese reminded me, that was a big day. What I remember most about it, for those of you who weren't here, was as the stolen generations came in from over there, they were frightened. Our job was to make them welcome. The apology was unfinished business for our nation. It is the beginning of new business for our nation. What I'm less proud of is the fact that I have now blubbered.
Paul Keating, the 24th Prime Minister of Australia, who served from 1991 to 1996. He was the best of the lot. He left school at the age of 15 and started working as a pay clerk. And from there he started climbing the ladders until he reached the coveted position of the Prime Minister of Australia. He suffered a sort of attention deficiency syndrome. There is just one reason why he had an opinion about everything under the sun, and he was happy to share it with the rest of the world. But he will be remembered for what former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad said of him. Mahathir once said about Paul Keating, "We can't do anything if people have no manners. Of course, children, we can smack them." And then he started laughing. Paul Keating famously asked journalists not to photograph him from behind, from where his bald patch can be seen. He also managed to convince the Australian public that all his failures, like the recession, the 17% interest rates, and the poor relationship with Asian countries, all were actually his successes. And he is still one of the most loved Prime Ministers of Australia. Bob Hawke was 23rd Prime Minister of Australia and is considered as one of the best to serve this nation. He is remembered for one of his youthful achievements. He was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford from 1953 to 1956. He scored 1 yard of ale, that is around 1.4 liters, 11 seconds, which was a world record at that time. When Bob was around 10 years of age, his brother Neil died of meningitis, of which there was no cure at that time. Subsequently, his mother Ellie Hawke developed a messianic belief in her son's destiny, which contributed to the high supreme confidence of Bob Hawke. At the age of 15, he presciently boasted to his friends that one day he would become the Prime Minister of Australia. Bob's father was a Congregationalist minister, and Bob in his youth was a true believer of Christianity. He visited India to attend one of the Christian meetings, he saw poverty there. And he got convinced that religion is not equipped to deal with the necessities of men. And he abandoned his Christian beliefs. And Bob Hawke once said, if you believe in the fatherhood of God, you should also believe in the brotherhood of men. And that describes Bob Hawke, a truly great and inspirational Prime Minister.
I tell you what, any boss who sacks anyone for not turning up today is a bum. You have to work a bit harder the next day to make up. It's a day for all Australians, isn't it? It's a day that brings us all together. Marvellous. Absolutely marvellous.
Malcolm Fraser, the 22nd Prime Minister of Australia, he was a very serious looking guy. But just 3 years into being the ex-Prime Minister of Australia, he showed the world what sort of a funny guy he was. In October 1986, Australian newspapers came with a big heading which read, "When Malcolm Fraser lost his trousers." The incident goes like this. That year, he went to United States to give a speech on apartheid, and the organizers arranged the best 5-star hotel accommodation for him. But the next day after the event, he was found wandering at a Memphis hotel, which was infamous for sex workers and drug dealers, just wearing a towel and nothing else. He lost his $600 cash, his wallet, his passport, his $10,000 Rolex, and his trousers too, and his pants too. He claimed that he was drugged. But Australia knew what really happened. But one person, his poor wife, she was the only person to believe his story. And Fraser called a taxi from there, and he borrowed the trousers of the taxi driver. His name was Roy Wilson. And Roy Wilson later told media he didn't get anything from the former Prime Minister. He didn't even thank him. And he also said those trousers were really good. Funny, isn't it? In Australia, we even had a Prime Minister who just disappeared into the sea. A Prime Minister just disappeared into the sea? Is that possible in any other country? Herald Holt, the 17th Prime Minister of Australia. He was lost at the sea and his body was never found, so he was presumed drowned. On 17th October 1967, Harold Holt with his 4 other friends decided to drive to Point Nepean. On their way back, the Prime Minister convinced the group to stop at Cheviot Beach in Portsea to have a swim. The weather conditions were very rough, so only one other member of the group Alan Stewart decided to stay with the Prime Minister and the rest returned back home. Stewart stayed close to the shore, but Holt went deeper into the sea and just disappeared. Holt loved the ocean, especially spearfishing, and he was a good swimmer too. And the search operation began, but couldn't find the body, so he was presumed drowned. A shocked nation could only come up with conspiracy theories. Some 15 years back, if you came to Australia, all businesses and shops used to be closed on Saturdays and Sundays. Even the capital city centres sported a deserted look on the weekends. But even then, a Prime Minister's job was a 24 hours, 365 days work. But we had a Prime Minister who worked only from Monday to Friday. Sir John Grey Gorton, the 19th Prime Minister of Australia, who served from 1968 to 1971. He was known as the Monday to Friday Prime Minister. He worked very hard from Monday to Friday and hardly on Saturdays and Sundays. Naturally, a question will arise. What was the Prime Minister doing on weekends? Extravagant drinking and womanizing. At a time, he had at least 2 to 3 extramarital relationships. If witness accounts can be believed, he even sexually assaulted Liza Minnelli, the American actress and singer. Gorton flu became a euphemism for prime ministerial hangover, and he always carried a cigarette in his hand and didn't dress smart for a prime minister. There is a story behind how he became prime minister. He was a fighter pilot and had a war-scarred face, and television was gaining popularity in Australia in the 60s. So his supporters argued that his war-scarred face and his boyish smile will be more acceptable in television. And it was not funny to have a prime minister like him. When we talk about womanizers and prime ministers, it would be an injustice to leave out Ben Chifley. Joseph Benedict Chifley, the 16th Prime Minister of Australia, who served from 1945 to 1949. He is the most loved Prime Minister of all time, a truly inspirational leader. No wonder his office staff love him too. Simultaneously, he had affairs with his secretary, her sister, and a typist from his office. Even Casanova would have struggled to pull off such a feat. In 1951, when he died of heart attack at a Canberra hostel where he was staying, he was with his secretary Phyllis Donnelly.